Right now, the scale of the missile apocalypse for Russia has been revealed. Ukrainian defense industry geniuses have shown unique footage. Firepoint is shocking the world, and the Kremlin is in total hysteria. Even Putin couldn't handle this. You have to see this. Don't miss the hellish details. Coming very soon, a frontline Armageddon is descending on the Russians. The Ukrainian armed forces are breaking through in 4 directions. The occupiers are stuck in place. Putin is in a panic. Iron birds are tearing Russia apart from within. Shocking footage is blowing up the internet. Terrorist attacks are sweeping across Russia. Moscow and the mega cities are on the brink of catastrophe. Is it really another bloody Crocus Hall? Goodbye, Europe! Americans are discussing a new global security system. This decision by Trump will turn the world upside down. Shock, an explosion in the Kremlin. The noose around Shoigu's neck is tightening. The scale of the scandal is shocking. All this and more in our program Hellpoint. Sensation. The company Firepoint has revealed all its cards. These are unique shots of the Ukrainian military-industrial phenomenon. Let us remind you, these are the very geniuses who, in record time, created the Flamingo missile with a range of up to 3,000 kilometers and launched production within NATO. Watch the hellish details next.
A Ukrainian defense technology company is changing the war. Firepoint has, for the first time, shown unique footage of drone and missile production. Over the past year, the company has achieved impressive results both in production and in the effectiveness of its products. These drones are 3 times cheaper than their competitors on the market. These are drones used for medium-range strikes. According to published statistics, Firepoint's combat systems hold leading positions in the use of heavy combat drones. More than half of all uses of long-range drones with a warhead of over 30 kilograms are Firepoint systems. The company's drones have distinguished themselves by striking critically important enemy targets, including ammunition depots and arsenals in Toropets and Tikhoretsk. Several airfields, Taganrog, Marinivka, Engels 2, Shaykovka, airfield bases, positions of air defense systems such as the S-400, as well as, for example, in Sonsivka, Donetsk region, the command post of the 90th Tank Division of the Russian Federation. Sometimes there are even truly exclusive trophies, such as military helicopters. The activities of the Ukrainian company Firepoint are aimed at providing Ukraine with the capability to deliver just retaliatory strikes on Russian territory.
At the time when all this began, when people said we were fighting with one hand tied behind our back, I tend to agree with your opinion that this is the correct interpretation of what was happening then. But now we have our own production. Yes, we want more, we really do. You always want more, but it exists. And it is precisely our domestic production that has allowed us to use our forces and resources the way we see fit.
The Kremlin understands only the language of force. The best argument in any negotiations with Moscow is a powerful Ukrainian army and defense industry, particularly our own production of long-range drones and missiles, with which Ukraine can regularly strike targets in Russia located 1,000 or more kilometers from the front line.
In order to somehow bring this war to a stalemate, yes, we need to learn not only to repel enemy attacks on the front line, but also to suppress their logistics and their aviation. And of course, I'm not even mentioning the necessity of striking enterprises of Russia's military-industrial complex and its energy system.
For dessert, Ukrainian engineers have prepared the Flamingo cruise missile for the Russian occupiers. This Ukrainian pink bird not only boasts an impressive range of 3,000 kilometers, but also stuns with its warhead weight, over 1,000 kilograms.
Usually, the warhead of a modern cruise missile weighs about 450, at most 500 kilograms. As a rule, almost all missiles have a warhead of 450 kilograms, so a warhead weighing 1 ton is a game changer. When it hits a target, for example, an industrial facility, just 2 of these missiles can completely disable it for at least a year. That means there will be a single crater about 20 meters in diameter.
Aggressive Russian terrorists who relentlessly shell innocent Ukrainian cities must clearly understand a decisive and mirror response will most definitely come.
The front is boiling. The Ukrainian armed forces are doing what once seemed impossible, breaking through in 4 directions at once while the Russians are stuck in place. The Kremlin is in a panic. Putin is hysterical. Just yesterday, he was shouting about capturing Pokrovsk, Kupiansk, Mirnohrad and Kostiantynivka, but today his fakes are crashing against the iron wall of the Ukrainian armed forces. Ukrainian defenders are squeezing the occupiers' army to the last, while iron birds are destroying the Kremlin's strategic targets deep in the Russian rear. All the details right now.
Along the front line, which stretches for more than 1,250 kilometers, over 710,000 Russian occupiers have been deployed. Despite the enemy's overwhelming numbers, Ukraine's defense forces have advanced in 4 directions, while the Russians have managed to move forward in only one.
Putin has repeatedly claimed that Pokrovsk, Myrnohrad, and Kostiantynivka have been captured, not to mention other villages, and Kupiansk, especially since they raised their flags there several times. And it was Putin himself, not just his officials reporting to him, but Putin personally announcing that the city had been taken, just like Vovchansk. In other words, he needs to demonstrate the actual capture of territories and show us that offensive operations are ongoing. And if we do not agree to their terms, especially if we refuse to finally give up the Donetsk region, then accordingly, he will continue to develop the offensive operation in the winter, increasing pressure on the front and, so to speak, on the rear, on ordinary citizens, on the energy sector, so that people will freeze in winter, to sow panic and doubt, and in these few months, essentially achieve his goals for the so-called first stage, a ceasefire on his terms and the signing of peace, and then already the preparation for possible new operations.
The Russians struck the dam of the Pechenihi Reservoir in the Kharkiv region. Traffic on the roadway has been halted. The American Institute for the Study of War does not confirm Russian claims of successes in the southern part of Vovchansk and in the Kupiansk district.
Reporting from the crucial Vovchansk direction. Here it is, my trusty and reliable Niva. Of the quick update.
One Russian war correspondent claimed that their troops advanced in the southern part of Vovchansk, while another said that the Russians captured the village of Lyman and control 80% of Vovchansk. The occupiers are using the tactic of coloring in areas they allegedly captured. In many cases, fighting is still ongoing in these areas, and it's too early to talk about them being captured.
From the Slivoshny Caprice project, it was recorded that events are taking place 500 meters deep into territory that they themselves had previously colored as being under Russian armed forces control. In general, there are the most questions about the coloring done by this particular project. For them, literally, the defeat of a lone Russian soldier by an FPV drone is a reason to color in a couple of kilometers up to the spot where it happened. But at the same time, it's important to remember that control in today's reality is a very relative concept, especially in cities. Because while movement across open terrain is at least somewhat restricted, urban neighborhoods, where it's easy to hide from drones, are basically wide open. So for now, all we can really say is that fighting is taking place in the area that was previously marked as Russian, which in itself is already a positive sign.
Russian forces continued combat operations in the Zaporizhzhia region. In particular, the occupiers attacked near Huliaipol and Orikiv. However, there is still no confirmation of any changes to the front line.
It's unlikely that activity around Huliaipol will be any less today. Our assault units are also operating here. You know that the Russians periodically put out, including fake reports claiming that they've made advances somewhere. Obviously, these fake reports are primarily aimed at Ukrainian society in order to create a certain emotional atmosphere.
On November 21st, propaganda channels released a video showing soldiers holding a Russian flag in the Oleksandrivka direction and claiming the occupation of Tiki and Vidradne. Ukrainian forces liberated the village of Tiki in the Sinelnikova district of Dnipropetrovsk region from the occupiers. There is a confirming video. Ukrainian soldiers continue to defend Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad. In a video published on December 6th, 3 Ukrainian soldiers raise a flag on Yakub Kolas Lane in the northern part of the city, indicating that they are holding their positions. The commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine called this stage of the defense extremely difficult.
Our strategy is to exhaust the Russian army as much as possible, prevent its advance, hold our territory, while simultaneously striking the enemy in the rear in operational depth and on Russian territory in order to undermine its defensive potential and industrial capabilities.
General Oleksandr Syrsky also stated in an interview that Ukrainian forces are holding their positions in the north of Pokrovsk.
The Ukrainian army is conducting a strategic defensive operation aimed at containing the enemy's advance, preventing their breakthrough deeper into our territory, inflicting maximum losses, and carrying out counter-offensive actions in those sectors where we see the enemy's vulnerabilities.
At the same time, the Russians have managed to significantly complicate Ukrainian logistics in the Pokrovsk direction. The occupiers' goal is to completely cut off Ukrainian supply and evacuation routes. However, they have not yet succeeded in encircling the Ukrainian garrisons in either city. This is confirmed by the American Institute for the Study of War.
Ukrainian forces are maintaining limited logistics in the Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad direction, but Russian troops are likely able to disrupt the narrow Ukrainian evacuation routes and ground lines of communication using artillery and drones.
The defense forces are trying to organize additional logistical supply routes for the units. Throughout the week, the main direction was the north of Donetsk region. It was there that the Russians were transferring manpower. The transfers were carried out in columns accompanied by military police.
The dominant direction of the week was the north of Donetsk region. From the Berdyansk direction, through the city of Mariupol, towards Volnovakha, between 10 and 20 trucks were recorded daily, mostly carrying personnel and without tactical markings, which indicates new units after training and coincides with the training schedule.
Despite heavy losses, the pace of the Russian Federation's offensive is increasing. At the same time, Russia continues to intensify strikes on Ukrainian cities.
Shock! Terrorist attacks are engulfing Russia. The 26th could be decisive. The threat is erupting inside the country. The FSB is scrambling in panic. There's a real explosion in Bashkiria. All of Russia is on edge. Secret documents are already on the FSB chief's desk. Moscow and the major cities are in a deadly risk zone. Should Russia expect another Crocus Hall or something even worse? Watch carefully now.
These are the shots now being actively broadcast on Russian television. In these shots, FSB officers are detaining a cell of international terrorists in Bashkiria who were spreading the idea of creating a world caliphate. The 8 detainees were preaching the ideology of an armed terrorist organization banned in Russia among Muslims, and during underground meetings, they recruited others into their ranks. But such footage has been appearing more and more frequently on Russian television lately. Their main talking points are that the FSB has reported an increased threat of terrorist attacks inside the country.
From time to time, a reason for outrage is created in Russia. To a large extent, this is an external force. From time to time, there is a need to start stirring up the situation.
Russian security services are recording a rise in Islamic terrorism in Russia. According to media reports, such a report was received by the head of the FSB, Alexander Bortnikov, but has not yet been passed on to the Russian dictator Putin. However, according to other sources, the document may in fact have already ended up on Putin's desk. And interestingly, among the key threats is also the increased activity of certain sabotage groups inside the country that is far from the so-called special military operation zone, including even in the capital itself, Moscow. And one more important point concerns the threat of destabilization in the Caucasus region.
Actions that demonstrated the state's strength, that there are enemies and that they will deal with them. This is the strong Putin and yet more enemies who want to attack the fortress.
And here we return to the previously mentioned information about those detained in Bashkiria, where FSB officers managed to catch 8 members of a terrorist organization. At that time, it was reported that the group was preparing active operations on Russian territory. Sources who provided this information to the media agree that in 2026 the situation could worsen if the FSB and other agencies do not prioritize this area. But here it's important to remember that such messages in Russia are not reported just like that. These are well-planned provocations. Such terrorist attacks can also actually be organized by Russian special services, since this serves both internal and external audiences. For Russians themselves, it's simply about destabilizing the situation.
These statements will definitely be followed by terrorist attacks. Well, more accurately, it's likely that people will be detained or killed, and they will have documents indicating their affiliation with a particular terrorist organization or nationality. And this will be sold to the domestic audience. Yes, that's how Russians have always been frightened.
We all remember well the terrorist attack at Crocus, which Putin used to accuse the so-called neo-Nazi Kiev regime.
On the coordinator's orders, after committing the crime, the terrorists drove toward the Russian-Ukrainian border in a car, intending to then reach Kiev to receive the promised reward.
It's quite a complicated narrative. As far as I understand, there were FSB reports and posts from FSB-affiliated Telegram channels claiming that there was some kind of weapons cache prepared for these 4 individuals so that they could take the weapons and then break through toward Ukraine with them.
As a result, this tragedy became a tool for mobilizing society and a trigger for a new wave of voluntary contract signings with Russia's Ministry of Death. But for the outer circle, creating a fake is not that easy. First and foremost, because it has to be linked to Ukraine. And that's exactly what the Kremlin is actively working on right now.
If this is used in the Ukraine case, if they find Budanov's business card, so to speak, then it will be sold not domestically but abroad to the US. Look, they don't follow the rules of war.
A whole series of activities by the FSB is preparation for terrorist attacks both in Russia and in Ukraine. In Ukraine, the goal is to demoralize society against the backdrop of scandals, power outages, and the situation at the front. In Russia, it's to stir up the population in order to justify a new wave of mobilization.
Simply put, the Russian ruling regime is quite capable of organizing a series of terrorist attacks inside the country itself, then blaming everything on Ukraine and trying to use this to manipulate negotiations or to completely intimidate Russians and drive them into total mobilization.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Goodbye, Europe. Save yourselves. Trump is abandoning a longtime partner. Americans are already openly discussing this at closed meetings. However, the midterm elections are just around the corner, so Donald will try to chase two rabbits at once. What awaits the new global security system? Find out in the report.
Trump is abandoning, or rather waking up, Europe. Washington no longer wants to be the main guarantor of the EU's security. As reported by the Western press, the Trump administration has informed European allies at closed meetings that after 2027, the US will no longer be the main force in NATO. The responsibility for the alliance's defense will supposedly fall solely on Europe's shoulders.
This event marks a dramatic shift that puts Europe on a strict countdown, considering the raging war in Ukraine and the uncertainty surrounding transatlantic security.
However, despite all the alarm for European leaders, such behavior from the White House administration did not come as a surprise. The Pentagon had already warned that it planned to reduce its role in NATO's defense. And now it sounded like a tough ultimatum.
Essentially, he is stepping back from NATO, then narrowing his focus and concentrating on changing the mainstream centrist forces in Europe. And he declares that the United States will play a more active role in influencing such changes.
However, the Trump administration does not plan to reduce the number of American troops in Europe.
The US is and remains our most important ally in the alliance. However, the NATO bloc is focused on finding a solution.
In fact, issuing an ultimatum to the member countries of the alliance actually plays into their hands. In reality, the Pentagon will only reduce the number of high-ranking American officers in NATO's command structure. Some of these positions will be transferred to Europeans. And Donald Trump also wants the EU to start buying weapons from the US.
Among the winners in terms of time, resources, and attention are the Western Hemisphere and possibly the Indo-Pacific region. Sorry, but among the losers is Europe. It is coming out at a loss. This administration is basically saying good luck to all of you.
But there's no need to worry. Unlike Europe, Ukraine will always have all the necessary weapons and support from Trump. Despite the strategic pivot, American officials swear by it. The supply of weapons to Kyiv will not stop. In fact, it is expected to increase significantly by Christmas.
A list of Ukraine's priority needs. The Ukrainian side is making a statement that this is relevant right now, and purchases are being made.
It seems Trump has finally become disillusioned with Putin. So, on the eve of 2026, the American president decided to move on to Plan B, the famous peace through strength.
Russia is ramping up the intensity of its hybrid attacks. But the Kremlin thug only understands the language of force. Only that. That's why any attempts to negotiate after any other aggressive Russian scenario, like this one, for example, Putin will interpret as weakness, as Europe's weakness, and will push even harder.
However, no matter how hard Putin pressures Europe, he himself is under even greater pressure.
This war has been going on for 4 years already, and more than 1 million lives have been lost there. They will never conquer Ukraine. And as for resources, look at what Nabiullina says just a week ago. What did she say? Now, it's not about fighting for money anymore. It's about fighting for patriotism. All the regions from which they are fighting have been receiving large sums of money. Meanwhile, Ukraine country
will continue to receive military aid from the US and our European partners. Analysts assure.
A significant number of analysts indeed say, they often really say, this is absolutely not my own war. I will certainly not take part in it at all. They want to profit from this war and he will sell. This army is for the Europeans and the Europeans will pay and will supply this army to you.
And no matter how many loud statements the White House makes about NATO regarding, it will not affect Ukraine in any way. After all, Trump needs us to create his ideal image as a peacemaker, much more than it might seem. At the same time, as the strikes deep into Russia become more regular, support for the American president himself is growing.
Donald Trump has no other options. Either he has to distance himself, but he won't be able to because in America there are midterm elections in a year. In America, public opinion, the majority supports Ukraine, including among his own supporters. That's why he has to maneuver. He won't be as categorical as we heard at the beginning of his term, of course.
A shock scandal in the Russian defense sector. $15 million. That's the amount seized from former Shoigu deputy Timur Ivanov. And his wife claims she knew nothing about her husband's wealth. Now she is tearfully asking for the property to be returned. And she assures everyone that she tried to dissuade her beloved from working in such a tempting place as the Russian Ministry of Defense. But things aren't so clear-cut. The family's extravagant spending habits were left behind in the official's email. What intriguing details about this case have come to light? Find out right now.
One of the most high-profile corruption cases in Russia in recent years has taken a new turn, or rather has come to an end. Timur Ivanov, the former successor to the equally former defense minister Shoigu, who was accused of bribery and embezzlement of state funds, has been ruined.
Well, let me simply just reread the criminal code, because many people really think that our punishments are indeed incredibly severe.
In July, he was sentenced to 13 years in prison, and on December 5th, the court confiscated Ivanov's assets worth $15 million in favor of the state. Reading out the full list of confiscated property took 47 minutes.
Among other things, the property seized from the 50-year-old Ivanov included land plots in Rozdory with an area of almost 800 square meters, the Sofia Volkonskaya estate on Chisty Perelok in the capital, dozens of premium-class cars, and 170 pieces of jewelry weighing more than 2.5 kilograms. More than 40 pairs of watches with a total value of 1.2 billion rubles.
All of this wealth Timur Ivanov accumulated over many years spent at the Kremlin's feeding trough as the chief builder of Russia's Ministry of Defense. Ivanov even carried out construction in occupied and destroyed Mariupol.
It really will be a new modern neighborhood with kindergartens, schools, and a full range of infrastructure planned. Plus, we even plan to build an ice rink and a swimming pool. All of this will be available for the residents, and I hope they will get the most enjoyment out of living in this new community.
He was still building in 2024. No one put any real pressure on him. Rumor has it that corruption is just a smokescreen. In reality, Ivanov is being punished for treason. One way or another, the verdict has been delivered.
And
now for the most interesting part. Ivanov's ex-wife, Svetlana Zakharova, in her attempts to reclaim the property, stated in court that she had no knowledge of her husband's earnings. She also claimed that she had always discouraged Ivanov from working at the ministry since, according to her, it was nothing but debauchery there.
According to her, when Ivanov was offered the position of deputy minister at the Ministry of Defense, she was categorically against it. She was convinced that it would destroy our family relationships because of the extremely promiscuous and low-moral environment. Within that team,
Svetlana Zakharova does not specify exactly what kind of debauchery she is referring to. But if we talk about debauchery as a lack of shame and modesty, then we have another option. Money. Money, in which Svetlana Zakharova, while married to Ivanov, was rolling like a cat in cream.
Starting from 2010, Timur Ivanov's family didn't go to their dacha to dig in the garden for the whole of August, but instead vacationed on the Côte d'Azur. Every year they rented large villas there. For example, one like this. 5 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, 2 rooms for staff. A month's rent for it in 2013 cost 120,000 euros. That same summer they paid another 90,000 euros to rent this 37-meter yacht. Photos from Saint-Tropez once again filled Ivanov's wife's Instagram all August long. Timur Ivanov once again celebrated his birthday there. 25 guests arrived. This time they rented Villa Manguera, which has its own helipad, tennis court and swimming pool. A night there cost from 5,500 euros. And in 2017 they stayed at the same villa again. That is, once more, they spent 170,000 euros on a month's rent. And that same summer, they rented a yacht like this one.
In just 6 years of such regular vacations on the Côte d'Azur, the Ivanov family spent almost 1.5 million euros.
1.3 million euros for a total of half a year. At the same time, the Ivanovs' official annual income is about 25 million rubles, or $330,000. Yes, that's correct. Almost the entire annual family budget was blown in a month in Saint-Tropez.
We are ready to carry out any task, so the local defense military-industrial complex is always prepared to fulfill any mission. And
all this luxury was paid for with money that Svetlana Zakharova supposedly knew nothing about. She didn't know, yet she was buying antiques, jewelry, designer clothes, and furnishing a mansion in the center of Moscow with movable property. And
now let's take a look at 1 year of expenses, 2020 for example. Svetlana spent over 9 million hryvnias on various antiques, vases, sculptures, chandeliers and furniture. 1.7 million on fabrics, 1 million on bathroom accessories, 3 million for the repair of some boat. I spent over 700,000 on the annual maintenance of the horse. In the same year, she bought half of an apartment in an elite residential complex on the first floor from her ex-husband for $1.2 million. 90 million UHD. And of course, endless piles of clothes. And that's only what left traces in the email. The real scale was much, much bigger. And
everyone knows that here on Zakatievsky Lane, they rent a 300 square meter apartment. And here in the village of Uspenskoye on Rubliovskoye Highway, they built themselves a dacha with an area of 1,600 square meters. Such a place costs about 600 million hryvnias, but all of this is just dry numbers. Compared to what they actually have. In 2012, Timur Ivanov decided to build a noble nest for his lady, Svetlana. Right in the center of Moscow, at the address Chisty Perulok, Building 4, there is a real noble estate. A mansion in a classic style. Larger main house, 3 floors, almost 1,000 square meters. It was built in 1821. It was called a city estate, Volkonskaya background Mecca. In 2012, Timur Ivanov bought this house for 600 million hryvnias.
But Ivanov's ex will never reach her former level of luxury again. Of everything Zakharova asked to be returned, the court left her only the Rolls-Royce. Since 2004.
She asked to exclude from the Prosecutor General's claim 13 pieces of jewelry legally belonging to her and her underage daughter, as well as 2 pairs of wristwatches and 3 cars. This was about items purchased at a Christie's auction, a Graf ring as well as Cartier and Van Cleef pieces, which according to her she acquired during her first marriage. Of the
2.5 kilograms of seized jewelry, Ivanov's new partner did not get anything back either. A former colleague from the Ministry of Defense and TV host Maria Kitayeva.
There was a ring with which her first husband proposed to her and the children's bracelets. Kitayeva also asked not to seize the house in the village of Razdory, where she and her 4 children lived together with Ivanov, until his arrest. According to her, it is the only place where the children live, the youngest of whom is not yet 2 years old.
But let's get back to the topic of debauchery in the Ministry of Defense. We can talk not only about immense wealth, but also in the context of the presence of mistresses. And as practice has shown, all high-ranking officials of the Russian Ministry of Defense have them.
In fact, the more the better.
The aforementioned Sergei Shoigu spends his time in the company of a certain Elena Shabunova. As befits the companion of an official of such rank, she is no ordinary woman. And in the status of a billionaire who, thanks to Shoigu, made money on contracts with the Ministry of Emergency Situations and the Ministry of Defense. Valery Gerasimov, chief of the Russian General Staff, also taught his lover to profit from defense contracts. A month ago, Russian media reported that he had arranged a job for his lover, Olena Selifanova, at the Ministry of Defense. Gerasimov's companion worked there for 5 years and then resigned. For her fruitful work, Selifanova received quite a bit, not too little. The rank of first-class civil service referent and 2 apartments in Moscow. Unlike Ivanov's ex-wife, these women prefer luxury and silence. Maybe it's all because of their status as mistresses, but that's unlikely. After all, there's another person who as a mistress is not shy about wanting a lot out of life, Maria Shaleva. Russian media romantically and financially linked her to Russia's Minister of Defense, Andrei Belousov. The news broke in July after the girl posted a video of her flight on a military plane to the closed airport in Rostov-on-Don.
Who says planes don't fly to Rostov? They do fly, just not all of them and not for everyone. Anyway, I flew in again, I'm back in Rostov. They never let me go. Our PB grooms are not trustworthy at all. But Lidila is a Kremlin man. Reliability 200%.
After the scandal, Shaleva deleted the post about her Kremlin patron. And the Kremlin media wrote that they want to set up Bila Usova. They even supposedly found Shaleva's real lover, a serviceman in the Russian armed forces. The scandal died down, but the question remained.
It looks simple.
So, what kind of debauchery in the Ministry of Defense is former corrupt official Ivanova actually talking about?
That's all for now. Watch more hellish news from the front in the next episode.